It was a mistake. I told myself that every time it happened. The first time Eric kissed me, I swore it would never happen again. But here I am now, leaning against the edge of his desk in the empty office, his hands tracing lazy patterns on my hips, his breath warm against my neck. I should stop this. I should push him away, remind him and myself that this is wrong. I'm 55, divorced, and the head of the design team in a company where whispers travel faster than an email. He's 25, a brilliant programmer with a bright future ahead of him. And yet, when his lips brush against my collarbone, all my reasons for resisting dissolve like mist. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" I whisper, my voice shaky. "Every second," he murmurs, his lips curving into a smirk against my skin. It's intoxicating, the way he looks at me like I'm the only person in the world. When Eric walked into our office 6 months ago, I barely noticed him. Just another young, ambitious face in a sea of new hires. But he noticed me, and that's how it started. The first time we were alone, it was an accident, or at least, that's what I told myself. We were the last two in the office, finishing up the mock-ups for a pitch that was due the next morning. I'd been exhausted, my hair slipping out of its usual neat bun, my blouse rumpled from hours of work. But Eric? He wasn't tired. He was sharp, energetic, and so damn confident. "You don't give yourself enough credit," he said, leaning back in his chair, his gaze steady on mine. I laughed, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just doing my job." "No," he said, his tone soft but firm. "You're brilliant, and I think you know it." It wasn't what he said, it was the way he said it, like he saw something in me I hadn't felt in years. That night, something shifted. And now, as he pulls me closer in the dim glow of the office, I can't help but wonder how much further we'll fall before we hit the ground. I didn't recognize it at first, that pull between us, the tension humming just under the surface of every conversation. It wasn't instant, like some whirlwind romance from a cheap paperback. It was subtle, slow, like a spark catching fire in the corner of your eye, quiet at first, until it's impossible to ignore. I'm Lorraine, 55 years old, divorced for nearly a decade, and one of the senior leads at Apex Interactive, one of the biggest gaming companies in the country. My career was the only thing I'd prioritized after my marriage ended, and it had paid off. I was respected, though not always taken seriously. The gaming industry isn't kind to women my age, especially those who've been around long enough to know how things really work. I'd learned to work twice as hard as my peers, to be seen as half as good. And for the most part, I didn't mind. It was a badge of honor, a reminder that I'd earned every bit of the success I had. That's why I didn't see Eric coming. He joined the company about 6 months ago, part of a wave of fresh talent brought in to inject new energy into the team. Eric Whitmore, 25 years old, with a resume that made everyone in the department raise their eyebrows. He'd built his first game engine at 19, landed an award for indie game design at 22, and had a confidence that could make CEOs stumble over their words. I remember the first meeting where he spoke up. It was a Monday morning, one of those dry, endless brainstorm sessions where everyone pretends to care. Eric sat near the corner of the table, one leg crossed casually over the other, and when he started talking, the entire room listened. He didn't just pitch ideas, he owned the room. His concepts were bold, innovative, and when the VP asked for feedback, he didn't flinch. "I think the plan is solid," Eric said, his tone calm but self-assured. "But it's missing something. The market's saturated with ideas like this. If we don't take a risk, we'll get lost in the noise." I found myself watching him, more curious than impressed. That kind of confidence wasn't uncommon in the younger hires, but it usually masked insecurity. With Eric, it felt different. It felt real. Over the weeks that followed, Eric quickly became a favorite in the office. His energy was contagious, his ideas always a step ahead of the curve. Even the senior team members who initially rolled their eyes at his youth started deferring to him. I kept my distance, not because I didn't like him, but because I didn't want to like him. Men like Eric, young, brilliant, charming, were dangerous, not in the obvious way, but because they had a way of making you forget yourself. And then there was the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling he was paying more attention to me than he should. The first time I noticed it, we were in a small meeting to review project timelines. I was presenting the updated milestones for a game we'd been developing, walking the team through the challenges we'd been facing. As I spoke, I felt Eric's eyes on me, not just casually but intently, like he was studying me. When the meeting ended, he lingered as the others filtered out. "You've been carrying this project," he said, leaning against the table. I shrugged. "It's my job." "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "You're doing more than your job. You're the reason this hasn't fallen apart." I didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't unusual in my line of work, but the way he said it felt different. It felt personal. The turning point came late one evening, about a month after he joined the team. It was past 8 p.m., and the office was almost empty. I was at my desk, poring over a design brief that had been rushed to my inbox that afternoon. Most people had gone home hours ago, but I stayed. I always stayed. I didn't hear him approach until he was standing beside my desk. "You're still here?" Eric asked, holding a cup of coffee. "Deadlines don't care about schedules," I said, offering him a faint smile. He chuckled, setting the coffee down on my desk. "You need this more than I do." I hesitated before picking up the cup, the warmth of it oddly comforting. "Thanks." He pulled a chair over, sitting down across from me. "Mind if I stick around? I've got some ideas for the multiplayer system, and I'd love your thoughts." I should have said no. I should have told him to go home, to save his ideas for the next day. But instead, I nodded. For the next hour, we sat there, bouncing ideas off each other. His energy was infectious, his passion undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something exciting, like I wasn't just working but creating. At some point, the conversation shifted. We started talking about the industry, about the challenges of staying relevant in a field that's always chasing the next big thing. "You've been here a while," he said, his tone thoughtful. "How do you do it? Keep up, I mean." "You get used to it," I said, "or you burn out." "Burnout doesn't seem like your style." I laughed softly. "It's not. But it gets lonely sometimes." His gaze softened, and for a moment I thought I'd said too much. But he didn't look at me with pity or judgment. He just looked at me. "Lonely's not a bad thing," he said quietly. "Sometimes it just means you're focused." The air between us shifted then, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I felt it, and I knew he felt it too. After that night, things changed. I started noticing how often Eric lingered after meetings, how his compliments grew more personal, more pointed. And then there was the way he looked at me. Not like a colleague, but like something more. I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless dynamic between coworkers. But deep down, I knew better. I knew this was the beginning of something I might not be able to stop. It was the company happy hour that finally broke the last bit of resistance I'd been clinging to. Happy hours weren't my thing. They never had been. The crowded bar, the loud music, the superficial small talk. I usually made an appearance just long enough to avoid looking antisocial. But that night, I stayed longer than usual. Eric was there. The bar was buzzing with energy, everyone laughing a little too loud and drinking a little too much. Eric stood out like he always did, effortlessly charming the group gathered around him. I tried to keep my distance, nursing my wine at a table in the corner. At some point, he broke away from the crowd and headed straight for me. "You look like you're planning your escape," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I don't usually stay this long," I admitted, glancing at my glass. He smirked, leaning forward. "Then I'll consider it an honor that you're still here." I rolled my eyes, trying to play it off. "Don't flatter yourself." "I'm serious," he said, his tone softer. "You're not like everyone else here. You don't feel the need to fill the silence with noise." The comment caught me off guard. It wasn't flirty or teasing. It was genuine. "You're not what I expected either," I said, surprising myself. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did you expect?" "Someone cocky. Someone who thinks they know everything," I said. "You're different." "Different good or different bad?" I hesitated, meeting his gaze. "Good," I said finally. The way he looked at me then, like I was the only person in the room, made my heart race. The night wore on, and the crowd began to thin. At some point, Eric and I ended up in the break room, away from the noise of the bar. I'd gone in to grab water, needing a moment to clear my head, and he'd followed. "It's quieter in here," he said, leaning against the counter. "That's the idea," I said, taking a sip of water. He watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable. You know, you intimidate people. I raised an eyebrow. Me? Yeah, he said, stepping closer. You're brilliant, but you don't flaunt it. You just are. People don't know how to handle that. The compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a warmth rising in my chest. You shouldn't say things like that, I said quietly. Why not? He asked, his voice dropping. Because it's inappropriate. He took another step closer, closing the distance between us. And what if I don't care about what's appropriate? I didn't have a chance to respond before he kissed me. The kiss was sudden, electric, and completely overwhelming. My first instinct was to pull back, to stop this before it went any further. But when I felt his hands gently resting on my waist, his touch hesitant yet deliberate, something in me gave way. I kissed him back. The world outside that room seemed to vanish. It was just the two of us, the tension that had been building for weeks finally breaking. His lips were soft but insistent, his hands sliding up my sides as he pulled me closer. For a moment, I let myself get lost in it. I let myself feel the rush, the thrill, the sheer audacity of what we were doing. But then the sound of voices outside the door snapped me back to reality. Eric, I whispered, pulling away. We can't do this. He didn't let go of me, his forehead resting against mine. Why not? Because it's wrong, I said, my voice trembling. He stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. Do you really believe that? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I avoided him for days after that. At work, I made sure we were never alone together. I kept our conversation strictly professional, refusing to acknowledge the unspoken tension between us. But it didn't matter. Every time I saw him, every time he looked at me, I felt it all over again. And then he sent me a message. It was late at night, long after I should have been asleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and when I saw his name, my heart skipped a beat. Can we talk? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity before typing back. I don't think that's a good idea. His response came almost immediately. I'll come to you. I didn't reply, but 10 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, he was standing there, his hair slightly disheveled, his expression both nervous and determined. You shouldn't be here, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I had to see you, he said, stepping inside. I closed the door behind him, my hands trembling. Eric, this can't happen. Why not? He asked, turning to face me. Because of work? Because of what people might think? Yes, I said, though even I didn't believe it. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I can't stop thinking about you, he said softly. And I don't think you can either. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I kissed him. That night, everything changed. We didn't talk about work or consequences or the impossibility of what we were doing. We let the moment take over, losing ourselves in each other. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not just alive. I felt seen, desired. Like I was more than just the sum of my responsibilities and achievements. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, he traced his fingers along my arm, his touch sending shivers down my spine. You don't know what you do to me, he murmured. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next morning, I woke up alone. He'd left a note on the nightstand. Last night was everything. Let me know if you're okay. I stared at the note for a long time, my heart a mess of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to end it right then, to go back to the way things were before. But another part of me, the part that craved the way he made me feel, knew it was already too late. After that night, there was no turning back. Eric and I fell into a rhythm, one that danced dangerously on the edge of exposure. It started with stolen moments at work, his hand brushing against mine as we passed each other in the hallway, the way his gaze lingered during meetings when no one else was looking. Then came the late-night texts. Thinking about you. I can't stop. Come over. Each message pulled me further into him, into the gravity of what we'd started. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone in one of the smaller conference rooms. Most of the office had cleared out early for lunch, leaving the space unusually quiet. We were supposed to be discussing a design review, but neither of us could focus. Eric sat across from me, his chair tilted back, his fingers tapping idly on the edge of the table. He was wearing that faint, knowing smirk of his, the one that made my heart race despite myself. You're distracted, he said, breaking the silence. So are you. I shot back, trying to maintain my composure. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. I can't help it. You're right in front of me. My breath caught, and for a moment I forgot how to respond. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine, and I felt the heat of his touch like a spark. Eric, I whispered, glancing toward the glass walls of the conference room. No one's here, he said softly, his fingers curling around mine. It's just us. The rational part of me knew we were being reckless, but the way he looked at me, like he was daring me to let go, made it impossible to think straight. He stood, rounding the table until he was standing beside me. He didn't touch me right away. He just stood there. His presence overwhelming, his gaze locked on mine. Do you want me to stop? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He took my silence as permission, leaning down to press his lips to mine. It was slow at first, deliberate, as though he was savoring every second, but when I reached up, pulling him closer, the kiss deepened, and all the tension that had been building between us spilled over. That was how it started. Stolen moments in conference rooms, whispered exchanges in empty hallways, the thrill of secrecy fueling every touch, every kiss. But it didn't stay contained to the office for long. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, Eric texted me, "Come over, I need to see you." I hesitated, staring at the screen, my pulse quickening. I knew I should say no, that this was getting out of hand, but instead I found myself typing back, "Send me the address." When I arrived at his apartment, he was waiting for me at the door. He didn't say anything. He just pulled me inside, his hands sliding to my waist as he kissed me like he'd been waiting for this all day. His apartment was small but tidy, with shelves lined with books and a desk cluttered with sketches and programming notes. It was a space that felt wholly him. Young, creative, and full of energy. We didn't talk much that night. There wasn't any need for words. Our meetings became more frequent, more intense. We'd spend hours in his apartment, the city lights filtering through the windows as we lost ourselves in each other. But the secrecy came with a price. One afternoon, Carla, my closest friend and colleague, pulled me aside in the break room. "Lorraine," she said, her tone careful but pointed, "is there something going on with you and Eric?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, people are talking," she said, lowering her voice. "You two have been spending a lot of time together, and it's not just me noticing." I forced a laugh, shaking my head. "We're working on the same project. Of course we spend time together." Carla didn't look convinced. "Just be careful," she said. "This place has eyes everywhere." Her words stuck with me, a constant reminder of the risk we were taking. The first real crack in our carefully constructed world came during a company retreat. It was a weekend trip to a resort just outside the city, meant to foster team bonding and creative collaboration. Eric and I both knew it would be dangerous, but we couldn't stay away from each other. On the second night, after the scheduled events had ended and most of the team had gone to bed, Eric knocked on the door of my hotel room. I opened it just enough to see him standing there, his tie loosened, his shirt slightly rumpled. "Eric," I whispered, glancing down the hallway. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't stay in my room," he said, his voice low. "Not when I knew you were just down the hall." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "This is too risky." He stepped closer, his hand brushing against the doorframe. "Then tell me to leave." I didn't. I let him in. We tried to be careful, but the retreat only heightened the tension between us. By the time we returned to the office, it felt like everyone was watching. Rumors started to swirl, quiet at first, then louder. Carla tried to warn me again, but I brushed her off, telling myself she was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew the truth. Our secret wasn't as well hidden as we thought. One day, during a particularly heated meeting, the VP made a comment that sent a chill down my spine. "It's great to see such strong collaboration between you and Eric," he said, his tone light but laced with something else. "I'd almost think you two were inseparable." The room went silent, all eyes on us. Eric didn't flinch, his composure unshaken, but I felt my face flush. After the meeting, I pulled him aside. "We need to be more careful," I said, my voice low. He smirked, leaning against the wall. "Let them talk, they don't know anything." But they did. Or at least they suspected, and the closer we became, the harder it was to keep the truth hidden. I should have known it would all come crashing down. It was only a matter of time. For weeks, the tension at work had been palpable. People weren't outright saying anything, but I could feel the weight of their stares. The whispered conversations that stopped the moment I walked into a room, the pointed glances whenever Eric and I were seen together. It was all building towards something I couldn't stop. But I wasn't prepared for how it happened. It was a Wednesday morning when the email hit my inbox. The subject line read, HR follow-up confidential. My stomach dropped. I clicked on it, my hands trembling as I read the words. Lorraine, we've been made aware of a situation involving inappropriate conduct between you and a subordinate employee. We need to meet at 3 p.m. today to discuss this matter. Please confirm your attendance. My heart stopped. I reread the email 3 times, my mind racing. Someone had said something. Someone had known. But who? I called Eric immediately. They know, I said, my voice shaking. HR just emailed me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean they know? He asked, his voice tense. I don't know how, I said, pacing my office. But they're calling me in this afternoon. Eric, this could ruin everything. I'll handle it, he said quickly. If they ask, I'll say it was all me. You didn't do anything wrong. No, I said firmly. I'm not letting you take the fall for this. We're in this together. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my chest. The meeting was worse than I'd imagined. 3 HR reps sat across from me in a cold, sterile conference room. One of them, a woman with sharp features and an unreadable expression, slid a stack of printed emails across the table. Lorraine, she said, her tone calm but firm. Can you explain these? I stared at the pages, my blood running cold. They were emails between Eric and me, personal, flirtatious, unmistakably inappropriate. Messages I thought had been private. Where did you get these? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They were brought to our attention anonymously, she said. We won't disclose the source. Anonymous. My mind raced. Someone had leaked these. Someone wanted to see me fall. The rest of the meeting was a blur. They asked question after question, dissecting every interaction I'd had with Eric over the past few months. I tried to keep my answers measured, professional, but the evidence was damning. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the room feeling like a shell of myself. Eric was waiting for me in the hallway. One look at my face, and he knew. What did they say? He asked quietly. They're still deciding, I said, my voice trembling. But this isn't going to end well. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Eric, we can't, not here. He nodded, his jaw tight. Let's talk after work. That evening, we met at his apartment. The air between us was heavy, charged with a mix of anger, fear, and desperation. This isn't fair, Eric said, pacing the room. They're treating you like a criminal for something we both wanted. It doesn't matter what we wanted, I said, sinking onto the couch. All they care about is appearances, and I'm the one they're going to blame. He stopped, turning to face me. Then let me fix it. I'll go to HR, tell them I was the one who pursued you. They'll let you off the hook. No, I said sharply. I'm not letting you ruin your career for me. What career? He snapped. They've already decided I'm guilty. I'm as screwed as you are. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. We shouldn't have done this, I said quietly. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. Don't act like this was a mistake. I looked away, tears stinging my eyes. It doesn't matter anymore, does it? We can't go back. The next day, the fallout began. HR sent out a memo to the team, vaguely addressing inappropriate workplace conduct and emphasizing the company's commitment to professionalism. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. Carla stopped by my office that afternoon, her expression a mix of concern and disappointment. Lorraine, she said softly, I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say, I replied, forcing a weak smile. I messed up, that's all there is to it. She hesitated, then placed a hand on my shoulder. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know you didn't mean for this to happen. Her words were kind, but they didn't ease the weight on my chest. By the end of the week, I knew what I had to do. I called HR and told them I'd resign. They didn't argue. It was easier for everyone that way. Eric tried to talk me out of it, but I was firm. This is my mess, I said, and I'm cleaning it up. He didn't agree, but he didn't fight me either. The day I cleared out my office was one of the hardest of my life. I packed my things in silence, avoiding the eyes of my coworkers as I carried the box to my car. Eric met me in the parking lot, his expression unreadable. "This isn't goodbye," he said, his voice quiet but determined. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The day I walked out of Apex Interactive for the last time, the world felt heavier. It wasn't just the weight of the cardboard box in my arms, filled with the remnants of over a decade of work. It was the weight of knowing I'd destroyed everything I'd built. For weeks, I avoided everyone. Calls from Carla went unanswered. I didn't even bother to check social media. I couldn't stomach seeing the whispers or speculation from colleagues who'd once admired me. My world had grown smaller, reduced to the walls of my home and the quiet hum of my thoughts. Eric reached out a few times. He called, texted, even sent an email. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care. I cared too much. That was the problem. I needed time to think, to process what had happened. What we'd done. One night, about a month after I left Apex, a letter arrived. It was addressed in Eric's unmistakable handwriting, a reminder of the closeness I'd tried so hard to forget. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope for what felt like hours before finally opening it. "Lorraine, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Not for what we had, I'll never regret that, but for the way it ended. You didn't deserve what happened, and I hate myself for being part of it. I'm in Seattle now, working on an indie project with some friends. It's not the same without you. Nothing is, but I'm trying to move forward, and I hope you are too. If you ever want to talk, you know how to reach me. Always, Eric." I folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. My chest felt heavy, torn between the lingering ache of missing him and the relief of knowing he was okay. In the months that followed, I started to rebuild. I picked up freelance work, small projects that kept me busy but didn't demand too much. It wasn't the same as leading a team at Apex, but it was something. Chloe, my daughter, visited more often, her presence a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. She didn't know the full story, only that I'd left my job after a difficult situation. I was grateful she didn't press for details. One evening, as I was finishing up a design proposal, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eric. "Hey, just wanted to say I'm thinking about you." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. A part of me wanted to answer, to tell him I was thinking about him too. To ask about Seattle, about his new project, about everything we could have been if the circumstances had been different. But another part of me, the part that had spent months piecing myself back together, knew that reopening that door might unravel it all. I set the phone down without responding, my heart heavy but resolute. Some stories don't have clean endings. There are no perfect resolutions, no neat bows to tie everything together. What Eric and I had was messy, complicated, and unsustainable. But it was also real. He made me feel things I didn't think I could feel again. For that, I'll always be grateful. But some fires burn too brightly to last. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its waves shimmering under the late morning sun. The salty breeze brushed against my skin as I stood behind the small windbreaker we had set up earlier, trying to peel off the damp bikini that clung to me. It was supposed to be a quiet, solitary moment. A chance to dry off and change into something comfortable before heading back to the house. But the sticky fabric resisted my every effort, twisting and pulling in all the wrong ways as I fumbled to free myself. I reached for the loose sundress draped over the chair, slipping it over my head with a sigh of relief. The familiar softness of the fabric was a welcome change after the clingy swimsuit. I smoothed the dress down over my hips, but as I was adjusting the straps, I heard his voice. "Meredith?" I froze, my heart lurching in my chest as I turned to see Liam standing just beyond the edge of the windbreaker. His dark hair was tousled by the breeze, his sun-kissed skin glowing under the bright light. "Liam," I stammered, my hands instinctively flying to my chest. His eyes widened slightly, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I hadn't fully pulled the neckline of my dress into place. I tugged at the fabric hastily, my cheeks burning as I tried to cover myself. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice catching as he quickly turned his back to me. "No, it's fine," I said, though my voice was anything but steady. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "I didn't mean to startle you," he said over his shoulder, his tone apologetic but slightly strained. We stood there for a moment, the sound of the waves filling the awkward silence. My mind raced, trying to shake off the embarrassment and figure out what to say. "It's okay," I said finally, forcing a laugh. "You just caught me at a bad time." Liam turned back slowly, his expression cautious. "I should have knocked, or, I guess, called out sooner. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, waving him off. But the way his eyes lingered on me, even for just a fraction of a second, left me feeling unsteady. Liam had always been attentive, ever since I married his father years ago. When Bill passed away, Liam had stepped into the role of caretaker without hesitation, checking in on me, fixing things around the house, and insisting I join him for family gatherings even when I tried to decline. He was thoughtful, steady, and reliable in a way that often reminded me of Bill. But lately, there had been something different about him. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was in the way he looked at me sometimes, like he was seeing me for the first time. It was in the way his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary when he passed me a plate or helped me out of the car. And now, standing here in the middle of this unexpectedly awkward moment, I couldn't ignore the tension simmering between us. "I was just coming to check if you wanted lunch," Liam said, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "Oh," I said, grateful for the distraction. "That sounds nice." He nodded, his usual easygoing smile returning as if to reassure me. "There's a little cafe down the road. I can grab something for us to take back to the house if you'd like." "That'd be great," I said, finally managing a genuine smile. "Okay," he said, lingering for a moment before turning to leave. "I'll be back soon." As he walked away, his shoulders relaxed, but I could still feel the faint tension in the air between us. I sank into the beach chair, my heart still racing as I stared out at the waves. What had just happened? It was such a small moment. A silly misunderstanding that should have been easy to brush off. And yet, I couldn't shake the look in Liam's eyes, or the way it had made my stomach twist in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted between us. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to ignore it. Liam returned about an hour later, carrying 2 neatly wrapped sandwiches and a pair of iced teas. He found me on the deck of the small beach house, reclining on one of the weathered lounge chairs, a paperback novel resting idly in my lap. "You look comfortable," he said, setting the bag down on the small table between us. I replied with a smile, though I felt anything but relaxed. My mind had been spinning since our earlier encounter, replaying the moment over and over in frustrating detail. "Well, I figured we could eat out here," he said, handing me a sandwich. "Can't beat the view." I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the moment. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, the sound of the waves a soothing backdrop as we unwrapped our food and settled into a quiet rhythm. For a while, we didn't talk much, letting the easy silence fill the space between us. But as we finished eating, Liam leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting out over the water. "This place hasn't changed much," he said softly. "No, it hasn't," I agreed, following his gaze. He glanced at me, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Do you remember the time Dad insisted on building that bonfire out here, even though it was so windy?" I laughed, the memory coming back in vivid detail. How could I forget? He spent more time chasing the flames than actually building the fire. "And then he burned the marshmallows," Liam added, shaking his head. "Completely black," I said, smiling despite the sudden ache in my chest. We fell silent again, the weight of the memory settling between us. Liam's father, my husband, Bill, had been gone for 4 years now, but moments like this made it feel like he was still here, his presence lingering in the stories we shared. "You miss him," Liam said quietly, his voice gentle. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Every day." He reached over, his hand covering mine. The gesture was familiar, comforting, but there was a softness in his touch that made my breath hitch. "I think he'd be happy to see us here," he said, his voice steady. I looked at him, my chest tightening at the sincerity in his eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, his hand lingering on mine for a moment longer before he pulled away. As the afternoon stretched on, we found ourselves slipping into the kind of easy conversation that had always come naturally to us. Liam told me about his job, his plans to take on a new project, and a funny story about a coworker who'd managed to lock himself out of his car 3 times in 1 week. I laughed more than I had in months, the sound surprising even me. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, like the weight I'd been carrying had momentarily lifted. But there was something else, too. Something unspoken in the way Liam looked at me, the way his gaze lingered just a little too long, or the way his voice softened when he said my name. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things. But the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Liam suggested a walk along the beach. I hesitated at first, but the idea of moving, of doing something to distract myself, was too tempting to resist. We walked side by side, our feet sinking into the cool sand as the waves lapped at the shore. The conversation was light at first, memories of family vacations, stories from his childhood, but as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the tone shifted. "You've been quiet lately," Liam said, glancing at me. "Have I?" I asked, though I knew he was right. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been through a lot," he said softly. "I just want to make sure you're okay." I hesitated, my chest tightening. "I'm figuring things out," I said finally. "That's okay," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to have all the answers right now." The kindness in his tone made my throat tighten, and I looked away, focusing on the horizon. As we turned back toward the house, the wind picked up and I shivered slightly. Without a word, Liam slipped off his light jacket and draped it over my shoulders. "Thanks," I said softly, pulling it tighter around me. He smiled, his hand brushing against mine as we walked. The contact was brief, but it sent a ripple of warmth through me, and I felt my pulse quicken despite myself. Back at the house, the tension that had been building all day seemed to linger in the air between us. Liam paused in the doorway, his hand resting on the frame as he turned to look at me. "Good night, Meredith," he said, his voice low. "Good night," I replied, my heart pounding as I watched him walk to his room. When the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a shaky breath, my mind racing. The connection between us was undeniable, but the thought of what it meant, of what it could mean, was almost too much to bear. As I lay in bed that night, the sound of the waves outside lulling me to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The next morning, the light filtering through the windows carried the promise of another warm day. I found Liam in the kitchen, already brewing coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. "Good morning," he said with a smile that seemed to soften the edges of the quiet unease I had woken up with. "Good morning," I replied, sitting at the small wooden table. He poured me a cup and set it in front of me, before leaning against the counter, his presence filling the room in a way that felt both comforting and disarming. "I was thinking," he began, his tone casual, "we could take the kayaks out today. It's been a while since I've seen you on the water." I hesitated, the idea tempting but nerve-wracking. "I'm not sure I remember how," I admitted. "I'll teach you," he said, his smile turning playful. "It'll be fun, promise." And with that, the decision was made. The bay was calm, the water glistening under the mid-morning sun as we dragged the kayaks down to the shore. Liam steadied mine as I climbed in, his hands firm but gentle as he held the vessel steady. "You've got this," he said, his voice reassuring as he pushed me off into the shallow water. For the first few minutes I fumbled with the paddle, struggling to find a rhythm, but Liam stayed close, his own kayak gliding effortlessly alongside mine as he offered quiet encouragement. "Relax your shoulders," he said, his voice calm. "Let the paddle do the work." I followed his advice, and soon enough I found myself gliding through the water with ease. "See?" he said, his smile widening. "Told you it'd come back to you." I laughed, the sound echoing across the bay. "Okay, you were right," I admitted. We paddled farther out, the houses on the shore growing smaller as the water deepened into a rich, endless blue. Liam led the way to a small cove sheltered by rocky cliffs, the kind of spot you'd only find if you knew exactly where to look. "This is beautiful," I said, my voice hushed as I took in the view. "I thought you'd like it," he replied, his kayak drifting closer to mine. We floated there for a while, the water lapping gently against the kayaks as we talked about everything and nothing. The tension from the day before seemed to dissolve in the sunlight, replaced by an easy closeness that felt like slipping into an old familiar rhythm. But as we made our way back to shore, something shifted. Liam's kayak drifted close to mine, and as he reached out to steady me against an unexpected current, his hand brushed against mine. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a ripple through me, and I found myself glancing at him. His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching, and for a moment it felt like the world around us had gone still. "Meredith," he began, his voice soft but certain. I looked away quickly, the weight of his gaze too much to bear. "We should head back," I said, my voice trembling. "Right," he said after a moment, though the tension in his voice was impossible to miss. Back at the house, the air between us felt heavier, charged with an unspoken energy that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing lunch while Liam lingered in the living room, flipping aimlessly through a magazine. "Do you need help?" he asked eventually, his voice carrying into the kitchen. "No, I've got it," I replied, though my hands trembled slightly as I chopped vegetables. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "You sure?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. I nodded, focusing on the task in front of me. But when he stepped closer, reaching for a knife to help slice the bread, I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced at his proximity. As we worked side by side, the tension between us grew almost unbearable. Every accidental brush of our hands, every fleeting glance, felt charged with something neither of us dared to name. At one point, as I reached for a plate, Liam's hand covered mine. I froze, my breath catching as I looked up at him. "Meredith," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The air between us felt electric, and I found myself leaning ever so slightly toward him before I caught myself and stepped back. "I should finish this," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "Right," he said, his hand dropping back to his side. That evening, after dinner, Liam suggested a bonfire on the beach. "I'll set it up," he said, already gathering the supplies. I followed him down to the shore, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin as the sun dipped below the horizon. Liam built the fire with practiced ease, the flames crackling to life as the sky darkened. We sat together on the sand, the warmth of the fire a sharp contrast to the coolness of the night air. For a while, we talked about nothing in particular, the conversation light and easy. But as the fire burned lower, the mood shifted once again. "I'm glad we did this," Liam said, his voice soft. "Me too," I replied, though my chest tightened at the weight of the moment. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "You've been quiet lately. I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," I said quickly, though the words felt hollow. "Meredith," he said, his voice low but insistent. "You don't have to pretend with me." His words broke something loose inside me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted finally. "You don't have to figure it out alone," he said, his hand covering mine. The closeness between us felt overwhelming, and as the fire crackled softly, I found myself leaning toward him. "Liam," I whispered, my voice trembling. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I'm here," he said softly, his gaze holding mine. For a moment I let myself believe him. The following morning the house was eerily quiet. The steady rhythm of the waves outside felt like a heartbeat, a reminder of the tension lingering between us after the bonfire. I busied myself tidying the kitchen, wiping down the counters even though they were spotless. I told myself I was overthinking everything, that the moments between Liam and me were just that. Moments. Fleeting. Meaningless. But deep down, I knew better. When Liam emerged from his room, his hair still damp from a shower, he carried that same easy confidence he always did. He offered me a smile, but there was something softer in his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "Morning," I replied, my heart racing even at the simplest exchange. "I was thinking we could head into town today," he said, leaning against the counter. "Grab some lunch, maybe check out the market." It was such a casual suggestion, but the way his gaze lingered on me made it feel like an invitation to something more. By late afternoon, we found ourselves wandering through the small seaside market, the salty breeze mingling with the scent of fresh flowers and grilled seafood. Liam stayed close, his presence steady and comforting as we moved from stall to stall. At one point, I reached for a small necklace at a jewelry stand, a simple pendant shaped like a seashell. "It suits you," Liam said, his voice low. I looked at him, my cheeks warming under his gaze. "You think so?" He nodded, his eyes soft. "Definitely." I hesitated, but before I could decide whether to buy it, Liam handed cash to the vendor and slipped the necklace into my hand. "Liam," I began, but he shook his head. "Just take it," he said, his lips curving into a smile. "Consider it a thank you for coming here with me." I slipped the necklace into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool metal as we continued through the market. By the time we returned to the house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I was tired but content, the unease of the morning replaced by a quiet warmth I couldn't quite name. After dinner, Liam suggested another walk on the beach. "I promise I won't keep you out too late," he teased, his grin boyish. I laughed softly, nodding. "Okay, just a quick one." The beach was nearly empty, the last traces of daylight fading into the horizon as we strolled along the shore. The cool sand shifted beneath my feet, and the sound of the waves felt soothing, almost hypnotic. Liam walked beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze fixed on the water. "I'm glad we did this," he said after a while, his voice quiet. "Me too," I replied, though my chest tightened at the weight of the moment. He stopped walking, turning to face me. "Meredith," he began, his tone careful. "I need to say something." I froze, my heart pounding as I looked at him. He hesitated, his hands sliding out of his pockets. "I don't know when it started," he said, his voice low, "but I can't stop thinking about you." "Liam," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know this is complicated," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine, "but I can't ignore how I feel. And I don't think you can either." The air between us felt impossibly thick, and I struggled to find the right words. It's not something we can just." "Why not?" he interrupted gently, stepping closer. "Why can't we? We're both adults. We know what this is." "What if it's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "What if it's right?" he countered, his eyes searching mine. The simplicity of his question left me speechless, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "I'm not asking you to decide anything right now," he said softly. "I just need you to know how I feel." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, my chest tight with a mix of fear and longing. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I stepped closer, my hand reaching for his. "Liam," I whispered, my voice breaking. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "Just tell me one thing," he said, his voice steady. "Do you feel it too?" "Yes," I admitted, the word tumbling out before I could stop it. Relief washed over his face, and he leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tentative and filled with a quiet intensity. The world around us seemed to fade as the kiss deepened, the sound of the waves and the cool night air fading into the background. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer as I wrapped my arms around his neck. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Every nerve, every emotion, every part of me fully awake and present in the moment. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our foreheads resting against each other as the weight of what had just happened settled over us. "This changes everything," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It doesn't have to," Liam said softly. "We can take this one step at a time." I nodded, though the fear still lingered at the edges of my mind. "Okay," I said finally. We walked back to the house in silence, the tension between us replaced by a quiet understanding. When we reached the door, Liam turned to me, his expression soft. "Good night, Meredith," he said, his voice low. "Good night," I replied, my heart pounding as I watched him step inside. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, the way his touch had made me feel. I knew we'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. But for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The next morning, the house felt different. The air was heavier, the silence louder, as though the very walls had absorbed the weight of what had happened between Liam and me. I lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, staring at my coffee mug as if it held the answers I so desperately needed. My mind replayed the night before on an endless loop. The way his lips had felt against mine, the way his hands had steadied me, grounding me in a moment that felt impossibly right and terrifyingly wrong all at once. The sound of Liam's footsteps on the stairs pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hair tousled, his expression careful. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "Morning," I replied, though my voice barely carried. He stepped into the room, his movements tentative, as though he was afraid to disturb the fragile equilibrium between us. "I was thinking we could spend the day in," he said. "Maybe just relax." I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of the suggestion. "That sounds nice." We spent the morning in the living room, the television on but largely ignored as we sat on opposite ends of the couch. The space between us felt both vast and impossibly small, the unspoken tension crackling like static in the air. At one point, Liam reached for the remote, his hand brushing against mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, and I pulled my hand back quickly, my cheeks flushing. "Sorry," he murmured, his voice low. "It's fine," I said, though my pulse was racing. We fell silent again, the weight of everything left unsaid pressing down on us. By the afternoon, the tension had become unbearable. I retreated to the deck, needing space to think, to breathe. The ocean stretched out before me, its endless expanse both comforting and overwhelming. I didn't hear Liam approach until he was standing beside me, his presence as steady and unyielding as the tide. "Meredith," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. I turned to look at him, my chest tightening at the seriousness in his expression. "We can't keep dancing around this," he said, his tone careful but firm. "I know," I admitted, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Talk to me," he said. "Please." I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. "I don't know how to do this," I said finally. "You don't have to," he said, his voice gentle. "We'll figure it out together." "But what if?" He cut me off, his hand reaching for mine. "What if it works?" he asked, his tone insistent. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Liam, this is so much more complicated than you realize." "I know exactly how complicated it is," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I don't care. I care about you." The raw honesty in his words broke something loose inside me, and before I could stop myself, I stepped closer, my hand reaching for his. "I care about you too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Relief washed over his face, and he lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. "This doesn't have to be perfect," he said. "It just has to be real." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Liam suggested a movie. We sat on the couch, the space between us gradually shrinking until his arm found its way around my shoulders. I leaned into him, my head resting against his chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to let go of the fear, if only for a little while. But as the movie played on, I felt his fingers brushing against my arm, the touch sending a shiver down my spine. "Meredith," he murmured, his voice soft but insistent. I looked up at him, my heart pounding as his gaze held mine. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice barely audible. Before I could respond, he leaned down, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. This time I didn't pull away. I let myself sink into the moment, into him, the world around us fading until all that remained was the warmth of his touch and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against mine. We didn't stop there. The boundaries we had carefully maintained crumbled completely, leaving us vulnerable and exposed in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Liam's hands were gentle but sure as he pulled me closer, his touch igniting a fire that had long been dormant. Every kiss, every caress, felt like a promise, a reassurance that we weren't alone in this. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the glow of the television casting soft shadows across the room. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, his voice low and filled with concern. I nodded, my head resting against his chest. "I think so," I said, though my voice trembled. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his arms tightening around me. "We'll figure this out," he said. As the night stretched on, I found myself drifting between fear and hope, the two emotions warring for control. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something, instead of standing still. When Liam finally left to go to his room, he kissed me softly at the door, his touch lingering as though he didn't want to let go. "Good night," he said, his voice warm. "Good night," I replied, my chest tightening as I watched him walk away. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the day. The doubts were still there, whispering at the edges of my mind, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the quiet certainty that Liam had given me. We had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains in my room, casting golden streaks across the walls. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was still mussed from the night before, and my thoughts felt just as tangled. The events of the previous evening replayed in my mind with vivid clarity. Liam's touch, his words, the way he'd looked at me as though I was the only person in the world who mattered, all of it was undeniable. And yet, the weight of what we had done pressed down on me, filling my chest with equal parts exhilaration and dread. I heard footsteps in the hallway and glanced at the door just as Liam appeared, leaning against the frame with an easy, familiar smile. "Morning," he said, his voice warm but cautious. "Morning," I replied, my voice soft. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that felt both comforting and overwhelming. "I made coffee," he said. "Thanks," I said, standing and smoothing the hem of my robe. "I'll be out in a minute." Liam nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before he turned and left. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the salty sea breeze wafting in through the open windows. Liam was at the counter, pouring a second cup as I walked in. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "Thanks," I murmured, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. We sat at the small table, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. Finally, Liam broke the silence. "We should talk," he said, his voice careful. I nodded, my stomach twisting. "I know." He set his mug down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I meant everything I said last night," he began. "I care about you, Meredith. More than I probably should. But I don't regret what happened." I looked down at my coffee, my chest tightening. "It's not that simple," I said softly. "I know it's not," he replied, his tone steady. "But that doesn't mean it's wrong." I shook my head, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "What if it is?" "What if it isn't?" he countered, his gaze unwavering. "What if this is exactly what we both need?" The sincerity in his voice was almost too much to bear, and I felt the tears spill over, streaking down my cheeks. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice trembling. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But I need you to know that I'm here. Whatever happens, I'm here." The warmth of his hand against mine steadied me, and for the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of hope. The rest of the day passed in a quiet blur. We didn't talk much, but Liam stayed close, his presence a constant reassurance. In the afternoon, we took a walk along the beach, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. At one point, as we stood at the edge of the water, Liam turned to me, his expression serious. "Let's leave," he said suddenly. I blinked, startled. "What?" "Let's leave this place," he said, his voice firm. "This town, this house, everything. Let's start over somewhere new." "Liam," he stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Think about it," he said softly. "We could go somewhere no one knows us. We could build a life together, without all the judgment, without the past hanging over us." The idea was as terrifying as it was tempting, and I felt my chest tighten. "I don't know if I can just walk away," I said, my voice trembling. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "But promise me you'll think about it." I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me. "Okay," I said finally. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I found myself leaning into Liam's side, his arm draped loosely around my shoulders. "You're quiet," he said softly. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About what comes next," I admitted. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his touch steady and reassuring. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together," he said. For the first time, I let myself believe him. The next morning, as I packed my bags, I caught a glimpse of the necklace Liam had bought me at the market. I slipped it over my head, the cool metal resting against my skin like a quiet reminder of everything we had shared. When Liam appeared in the doorway, his smile was soft but filled with certainty. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, my heart racing. "Ready." As we left the house and walked toward his truck, I felt a mix of fear and hope swirling inside me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping toward something, instead of away from it. With Liam by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next.